My mother didn't look up from her crossword puzzle when she said it. That was the part I kept coming back to. Later, when I was sitting in a Tim Hortons parking lot at 11 o'clock at night with a duffel bag in my back seat and nowhere specific to go, she hadn't even put down her pen. "Your brother needs the basement suite," she said. "You'll have to find something else." I was 33 years old. I had been living in that basement suite for 4 years. I had been paying $500 a month in rent, below market, yes, but still on time every single month, sometimes 2 months ahead, when I knew things were tight upstairs. I had fixed the furnace twice. I had repainted the deck. I had driven my father to his cardiac appointments every second Tuesday for 2 years, because my mother didn't like merging on the highway. None of that was in her crossword. "Nadia moved out," she said, still not looking at me. That was my sister-in-law, or rather my former sister-in-law, because my brother's marriage had ended 8 months ago in a way that everyone in the family had seen coming except my brother, who had apparently been the last to know that Nadia had been quietly miserable for years. "He has the kids every other week. He needs the space." "Mom," I said. "I live there. You're 33, Petra." She said my name the way she always said it when she wanted to remind me that I had disappointed some version of her expectations. "You should have your own place by now anyway. This works out for everyone." I want to be careful here about how I describe what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't one thing. It was several things stacked on top of each other. There was the immediate practical panic, the kind where your brain starts calculating rent prices in Vancouver and comes up with numbers that make your vision go a little gray. There was the older, more familiar feeling of being the child who gets reshuffled when someone else needs the room. And underneath both of those, very quiet and very still, was something else entirely. Something that had to do with whose name was on the mortgage documents I had co-signed 18 months ago without anyone in my family ever bothering to ask why the bank had required it. I didn't say any of that. I said, "Okay, I'll need a few weeks to find something." "Your brother wants to move in by the end of the month," she said. It was the 14th. I picked up my coffee cup, which had gone cold while we were having this conversation, and I carried it to the kitchen sink and poured it out and said that I had an early shift tomorrow. My mother said something about how I should have thought ahead. I didn't answer. I went down the stairs to my suite, closed the door behind me, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the wall for a long time. Let me tell you about the house. My parents bought it in 2003, a detached 4-bedroom in Burnaby, the kind of neighborhood that felt ordinary then and feels impossible now. My father worked in logistics. My mother worked part-time at a medical billing office until she didn't anymore. They had the house, they had a mortgage, they had 2 kids, and a reasonable middle-class life that got less reasonable as the years went by, and the cost of everything kept climbing while my father's pension stayed exactly where it was. My brother Devin is 4 years older than me. When we were growing up, Devin was the one who filled a room. He was funny in a performative way, the kind of funny that makes parents proud at dinner parties, but doesn't necessarily translate into functional adulthood. He dropped out of his business program after 2 years. He worked a series of jobs that never quite became careers. He met Nadia, who was patient and steady and deserved significantly better, and they got married when he was 28, and my parents paid for the wedding, and everyone agreed it was a beautiful day. I graduated from BCIT with a diploma in financial services. I got a job at a credit union in Coquitlam. I was not the child anyone thought to worry about or invest in, which meant I was also not the child anyone thought to check in on. And that specific kind of independence has a flavor to it that I can describe but not quite name. It isn't freedom. It's more like being trusted to handle things because no one is paying close enough attention to notice when you're struggling. I moved back home when I was 29 because the apartment I'd been splitting with 2 other people fell through when one of them got a job in Calgary and the other got a boyfriend with his own place. And the rental market in Metro Vancouver is not a place where you land on your feet quickly. It was supposed to be temporary. I told myself 6 months. I signed an informal rental agreement with my parents, $500 a month, utilities included, because my mother said that covered her costs, and I didn't push it because I felt guilty about being there at all. 6 months became 2 years, became 4. Here is what happened in those 4 years that my mother's crossword puzzle does not reflect. In my second year living there, my father pulled me aside after a Sunday dinner and told me something he had not told my mother. The house had a line of credit attached to it, a HELOC he had taken out in 2019 to cover some renovation costs that had ballooned, and he had not been making the minimum payments with any consistency, and the bank was starting to make noises that he didn't like. He told me this in the garage, standing next to a lawnmower that hadn't worked in 3 years, with the door to the house closed, and he looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to put it down. I was not surprised. I worked at a credit union. I understood what the noises from a bank meant. I asked him how much. He told me. I did not react the way he expected me to react, which I think was part of why he had come to me and not Devin. Devin's reactions to financial information tended to involve a lot of energy and very little resolution. I sat with the number for a moment, and then I asked him what he wanted to happen. "I don't want to lose the house," he said. "Your mother doesn't know how bad it is. I don't want her to know." This is the part where I should probably say something about what it means to protect a parent from their own financial reality, and whether that protection is kind or whether it's its own kind of harm. I have thought about this a lot in the time since. I don't have a clean answer. What I have is the choice I made. I talked to the mortgage specialist at my branch. I talked to a lawyer who did real estate work. I reviewed my own savings, which I had been building for 5 years with the specific discipline of someone who grew up watching money be a source of anxiety, and decided to make it a source of control instead. The HELOC balance was not small, but it was manageable if approached correctly, and I had the credit score and the income verification to do what needed doing. My father and I restructured. I paid out the line of credit. In exchange, we signed a co-ownership agreement prepared by the lawyer. I held a 49% interest in the property, he held 51%. It was not complicated. It was clean and documented and registered with the Land Title and Survey Authority of British Columbia. My name went on title. The HELOC was closed. My mother did not know. She had never asked to see the mortgage documents. It had never occurred to her to wonder about the financial structure of the house she had lived in for 20 years. Because she had spent those 20 years operating on the assumption that the house was hers, in the way that furniture is yours. By proximity, by habit, by simple presence. She had never considered that ownership was a thing that required maintenance, that it could slip if you weren't watching, that someone else might be the reason it hadn't. When she told me to leave, she was standing in a house where I owned nearly half of everything. I spent one night at a friend's place in New Westminster. Her name is Gemma, and she has a spare room she calls the crisis room, not as a joke, just as a fact, because several people in her life have needed it at various points. I told her what had happened over tea at 2 a.m, and she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Does your mom know about the title?" "No," I said. "When is she going to find out?" "I don't know," I said. What I didn't say, because I hadn't fully formed it yet, was that I wasn't sure I was going to be the one to tell her. My father called the next morning at 7:45. I was already awake. I heard his name on my screen and I let it ring twice before I answered, not to be unkind, but because I needed 2 rings to decide what version of this conversation I was prepared to have. "Petra," he said, and the way he said it told me immediately that something had shifted. He sounded the way he had sounded in the garage 2 years ago, minus the shame, and plus something I can only describe as a particular kind of fear. "Your mother found the property tax notice." I set down my mug. "She was going through the mail," he said. "She saw your name on it. He paused. "She's asking me to explain. Property tax notices in BC go to the registered owners. I had been receiving mine separately, redirected to my credit union address, but my father's copy listed both names on title, and my mother had apparently found it in the pile of envelopes he kept on the counter next to the phone, the pile he had been meaning to sort through since November." "What did you tell her?" I asked. "Nothing yet," he said. I didn't know what to say. I thought about that. I thought about the 17 years before I was born that my parents had spent building a life together, and the 20 years of that house, and the Sunday dinners and the Christmas mornings and every complicated ordinary thing that had accumulated between them. I thought about my father standing in the garage telling me he didn't want her to know. "Tell her the truth, Dad," I said. "The whole thing. Tell her what was happening with the HELOC and what we did about it and why. She should have known 2 years ago. Tell her now." He was quiet for a long moment. "She's going to be upset with me." "She might be," I said. "That's between the two of you." He hung up 20 minutes later after saying he needed to think. My mother called 11 minutes after that. I want to be precise about her tone, because it was not what I expected. I had braced for anger, the hot confrontational kind my mother did when she felt she had been wronged. What I got instead was something colder. She had moved past the first shock and arrived somewhere more controlled, which was, in my experience, actually harder to navigate. "There must be some kind of mistake," she said. "With the documents. There's no mistake, Mom. Your name shouldn't be on this house." "It's been on the house for 18 months, I said. "Dad and I registered the co-ownership agreement when I paid out the line of credit. I can send you the documents if you'd like to see them." Silence. Long enough that I heard the refrigerator behind her, the same hum I had heard in that kitchen my whole life. "You took advantage of your father," she said, "when he was vulnerable. I had expected this too, and I had prepared for it the way you prepare for weather you can see coming but cannot stop." "Dad came to me because the house was in trouble," I said. "He had been missing HELOC payments. The bank was going to move. I paid it out with my savings, legally, with a lawyer and a registered agreement. That's not taking advantage. That's the reason you still live there." She did not respond to that directly. She said that family property was different from a business transaction, that she couldn't believe I had done this without telling her, that she felt blindsided. I let her talk. I had learned, somewhere in my early 20s, that my mother's process required a certain amount of space before it could move forward, and that interrupting it only extended the whole thing. "The house is still here," I said when she paused. "Nobody is losing anything. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to understand what actually happened. Devin needs that suite," she said, and I realized then that she had not yet fully connected the two situations in her mind. Or perhaps she had, and this was her way of testing whether I had. "Devin is an adult," I said. "Devin needs to find his own place." The second silence was longer than the first. My aunt called that afternoon. My mother's sister, who lives in Kelowna and has strong opinions about family loyalty and very little information about property law. She told me I should think about what I was doing to my mother, who had given me everything. I listened politely and explained, once, clearly, what had actually happened. My aunt said that money shouldn't come between family. I agreed, and pointed out that the money had in fact been the only thing keeping the family in the house they were currently arguing about. She did not have a follow-up to that. Devin called on the second day. I had been waiting for this call in the way you wait for a dental appointment. Not with dread exactly, but with a particular kind of resignation toward discomfort that is coming regardless of how you feel about it. Devin had a way of opening conversations that made you feel like he was doing you a favor by having them, and he deployed it here with what I recognized as his maximum effort. He told me he knew things had been tense. He told me Mom had been harsh, and he was sorry about that. He told me the situation with Nadia had been brutal, and the kids were still adjusting, and he just needed some stability right now. "The basement would be really good for me, and the kids," he said. "It's familiar for them, they know the house." "Devin," I said. "You could find something close by. The market has some decent rental options right now." "Devin." I said his name again, more deliberately this time. "I own part of the house you're asking me to leave. You understand that, right?" A pause. "Mom said the paperwork was complicated." "It's not complicated. I paid off Dad's HELOC with my own savings and took a co-ownership interest in exchange. It took about 6 weeks to process, and I have every document. There's nothing complicated about it." "I just think," he started. "What do you think?" Another pause. Devin had grown up being the one who talked his way around things, and I could hear him trying to find the angle that worked. "I think family should be flexible," he said finally. "I've been flexible for 4 years," I said. "I paid rent on time every month. I covered Dad's cardiology copays twice when things were short. I repainted the deck. I paid off $38,000 in debt to keep your parents in their house. That's what I've done with my flexibility." He didn't have a clean answer for that. Nobody in my family, I was starting to understand, had ever been asked to look directly at what I had been doing while they weren't watching. I went back on the 5th day, not because anyone had asked me to come back, because it was my house, or close enough to it, and I was done acting like a guest who had overstayed a welcome that had never really been extended anyway. My mother was in the kitchen. She was not doing her crossword. She was standing at the counter with a cup of tea, and she looked, for the first time in my memory, uncertain in her own space. My father was at the table. He had aged something in 5 days, not dramatically, just in the way people age when they've had a conversation they should have had years ago. Neither of them spoke when I came in, so I sat down and I did. I told them I was not here to take anything from them. I told them I had paid off a debt that was going to cost them their home, and I had done it because they were my parents, and not because I expected anything in return except not to be treated like a burden while I was doing it. I told them that the suite was mine to offer or not to offer, and that Devin was not moving in, and that this decision was not up for a family vote. My mother set down her tea. Her hands were not quite steady. I didn't know about the line of credit, she said. I know, I said. Dad and I should have told you. You should have, she said it quietly, not as an accusation, just as a fact that she was placing on the table between us. I didn't know how bad things had gotten. They were bad, I said. They're not anymore, she cried. Not the way my mother usually cried, which was a weather event designed to redirect the room. This was quieter. This was a woman who had spent a week realizing that the house she thought she owned had been slipping away from her while she did her crossword, and that the daughter she had told to leave had been the reason it hadn't. Those are not comfortable things to sit with. I watched her sit with them. The word burden, I said after a while. Or anything like it. I don't want to hear it again. She nodded. She didn't speak. And I want both of you to acknowledge out loud what I've actually contributed here. Not as a favor. Not as a thank you. Just as the truth. My father spoke first. It took him a while to find the words, but he found them, and they were real. My mother took 3 more days. Devin found a 2-bedroom in Port Moody. It was a reasonable commute, a decent school district for the kids, and below what he thought it would cost, which I knew because I had actually spent an afternoon looking at listings in his area and sent him 3 that I thought fit his budget. Not because he deserved the help, because his kids did. I repainted the door to my suite a shade of green my mother had always called too much. My father said he thought it looked nice. My mother said nothing, which for her, in that context, I chose to read as progress. Some mornings I make coffee and sit at my kitchen table downstairs, and I let myself feel the specific quiet of a space that is mine in a way it took me 33 years to understand. Not the dramatic, vindicated quiet of someone who has won something. The other kind. The kind that comes when something that was always true finally gets to exist out loud. I didn't set out to own part of that house. I set out to keep my parents in it. That distinction matters to me, even now. Especially now. What I know is this: I made my coffee. I let it stay warm this time.